Okay, computerized maintenance management systems, a healthcare facilities leadership perspective of reporting. We've covered the implementation side of computerized maintenance management systems, and that was the front end. Now, like I mentioned, we're going to skip to the bookend, which is really the back side, the reporting side. Again, the stuff in the middle will be handled, I think, very proficiently by the vendors you purchase it from, through experience, and pretty much it's going to be the daily part of what you do. However, coming into a computerized management system, understanding reporting from the beginning, I think is extremely valuable, because it almost kind of helps you chart where you're going. You know, you need to have trajectory, you need to have a target, and at the end of the day, meaningful reports, meaningful analysis, and meaningful data is what you're really after. If it's not meaningful and not usable, there really is, it is almost, what's the point in doing it? And I really believe, again, this is one of the reasons why most data systems fail, because healthcare professionals or managers tend not to get value out of these very, very important systems, and at times some of these systems are very, very expensive. So we're going to talk about the first slide here. You know, this is a classic statement: garbage in, garbage out. We've all heard it. It seems like a cliche, but I think that the line right below it is where it takes it from cliche to meaningful, and that is, your analysis is only as good as your data. That is such a powerful statement. I found that truly is just so true. That it's one thing to do an analysis, and even that in and of itself I found to be challenging at times, to get folks to sit down and look at information and actually take and summarize what they see or look for trends and variances. However, if you don't have good data to analyze, then really, again, it really is, what's the point in doing it? If you don't know where you're going on vacation, you know, maybe you're going to the mountains, or maybe you're going to the beach, but you don't know, what clothes are you taking with you? How are you preparing for the trip? You have to know where you're going. And so in order to know where you're going, you have to have good data to make good analysis, to make good decisions. And really, it sounds oversimplified, and to a point it is, but this whole thing together, it all works together. You know, implementing right, collecting great data, good data, and then generating the right reports. And if you put all three pieces together, you end up with something very, very powerful and very, very different. I read something recently that said that 9 out of 10, or 90% of computerized maintenance management systems fail. I had read something that said like 60% or 3 out of 4, but when I read that, I was kind of like, you know, my experience has been very similar, that many databases just aren't being used for hardly anything that they could be used for. So hopefully that's what we're going to do. We're going to take a look at this, and we're going to be able to... Okay, so let's continue our journey here through reporting. Successful report priorities. I probably could have come up with a different list here as I thought about this. I could have gone more granular, or could have gone broader. At the end, I kind of tried to, again, strike some very high points, but yet brought us into the right level of detail. So the top things I put down as successful report priorities is data entry, and we'll go over each of these in more detail in a minute. Defining meaningful reports, database reporting package, analysis, decision making / follow-up, and summary and reporting follow-up. And those two sound a little bit alike, and they are, but it has more to do with the level of which you report, and what kind of action you follows up from collecting and analyzing your data. Data entry. Okay, data entry. Again, garbage in, garbage out. You need good data, and this is can be quite a struggle. I think that where we tend to fail here is you have some folks that are good at putting data in. You have other folks that tend to struggle. Even today, when you have a manual paper work order system, you have folks that fill out work orders well, and you have folks that really don't fill out work orders all that well. This is one of those things where when it comes to work orders, paper work order systems, and a lot of folks still do use them, who really has the time to go through and analyze and look through these work orders? I mean, if I'm a technician and I fill out a work order and I know that my manager really doesn't read my work orders and it just gets entered into a system, what's the motivation for writing any kind of a detail? Same way if you submitted papers and I really didn't read your papers and all I ever did was you just got a grade with no communication, no comment, nothing at all, and I did that all the time, you would change the way you wrote your papers. You would just go, well, hey, what the heck? And I've talked to students who have told me that from other online classes where they've written crazy stuff in their papers because they got to the point where they realized, hey, nobody probably even reads these things. You'll see that in work orders too. People will write stuff on work orders just because nobody ever reads them. So the work order is such a critical piece that you want to make sure that your work order is formatted the right way, with enough lines to fill out get what you need, and not too many things to be filled out, and to make sure that it's easy enough for the technicians to record what you want in the work order or with the work order system. It's got to be easy to use and not too complicated for data. But it all begins with that work order. The technology, again, kind of goes along the same way. It's got to be easy to use. It has to have a nice, what they call, front end. Very graphic, very visual, drop-down menus if possible, or just the right number of codes to put in the system. Again, I'm a big fan if it's routine service and everybody knows based on the type of work order statement of what needed to be done. You don't need any verbiage at all. You just need a closing code. Done, completed. And in fact, you don't even write that in that work order. You just pretty much put the code in there, whatever that code's going to be for completed, and you move on. Changing, light bulbs, a good example. Staff compliance, again, it's a constant one. I think as a manager, as a leader, you need staff compliance. Keep this thought in mind, that by and large, most people follow policies and processes, and we always have a few people that are outliers. If you don't address the outliers, what essentially you end up doing is you end up sort of demoralizing or taking away from the people that are performing the job. You really need to take care of outliers. If you got folks that just are not being compliant, they feel like they don't see the value, and a lot of times folks are not going to see the value, and they just need to do it anyway. But you need to pay attention to those folks and kind of bring them in. I always say, promote them in or promote them out, or bring them in or help them out. You can't just let folks just stay being resistant to change and not adapting. Wrench time or total time, very important conversation we're going to have a little bit later. But when it comes to wrench time or total time, a lot of folks, when you look at an average day that someone works, they'll work 7.5 hours. By the time you take lunch and breaks, you get about 7.5 hours that they're, quote, not on break or lunch. Now you have that 7.5 hours, and now they're out there doing work orders. Do you want to capture actual wrench time? I mean, do you want them to write the actual amount of time it took them to do the job? So again, let's use the light bulb example again. If somebody has to get the work order, has to go out there and collect the bulbs, then they travel to the location, then they take time to get access, to that area. Now they got access. Okay, wrench time begins. The moment that they go up the ladder, open up the lens, pull out the old lamp, take the other lamp, put the other lamp in, close it, check it, test it, and wrench time. That's one facet of wrench time. And then, of course, after that, they close the work order and they turn the work order in. What part of that are you counting as wrench time? To be accurate, wrench time is the time they spent doing the job. They physically spent actually turning the wrenches. Total time would be the time they got the work order to the time they turned the work order in. You can tell right now that's very different time. And I'm here to tell you at this moment that I pretty much always went along the line of total time, because I was like, well, we know that people are busy in transition and meetings and everything else, and but we do want them to record the amount of time they were active doing something. And so I always recorded the time that they spent, like I said, doing the whole activity. But we're going to talk in a little bit about, I've changed the way I think on this, and we'll talk in more detail in a little bit about that. Entry code cards. Again, it's always nice to give your staff just a little laminated card they can put in their pocket or in their notebook or whatever, with a list of codes you want. Codes for, like, for example, type of failure code or repair code. These codes are so valuable. If it is a code for a project, if it's a code for repair, if it's a code for corrective maintenance, if it is a code for a closing code of completed, or a closing code of waiting for parts, which means it's not closed but it's waiting, or if it's a closing code of not repaired or sent out, or whatever it is. Those codes are very valuable, and if your folks give you that information and they have those cards accessible, like a little laminate card, then you're more likely to get real-time, actual, what's going on information. And one of the keys to this is not to have too many, but to have the right amount. You should have probably somewhere between maybe 5 to 10 of each of these codes. The opening, close, the repair code, the closing code, and nothing more than that. That way, again, you may not have every code you need for everything that goes on, but you are going to capture, and then they're going to memorize these. And as they memorize them, they'll get rid of the cards, and they'll just do it very naturally. But if you have too many codes, then it becomes a burden, and they never memorize them, and it's harder to get to the data. Meaningful verbiage. When they are filling out their work orders, again, it is so very important, and this is where, as a manager, as a leader, you need to audit this. You need to make sure that if they're doing, troubleshooting, and it's taking them a while to find out what the problem is, that when you look at those work orders and you look at these more in-depth repairs, that they're writing down things that truly are meaningful and can be used by others. And that's where we come to the next thing, leave a trail. Again, as folks start to buy into the fact that this is going to be a powerful database and that we're going to use this data and it's going to be something for others to use. I mean, the situation, and we all know it as it is now, is the way it works today is everybody has their own little notebook. And in their notebooks, they'll write something that was meaningful to them, something that they learned. Maybe it's a gauge reading, or maybe it's the location of a valve, or maybe it's a repair, and they'll have their notebooks, and what happens is people know that somebody else has that information. They'll say, hey, I know so-and-so worked on that steam valve before, and I remember them spending a lot of time on it, and I know that they had to make a certain kind of an adjustment. And so they'll go to that person, and that person will pull out the notebook, and then it's like, okay, let me look at my notebook. Oh yeah, and here's what I did, and here's who I called, and so on and so forth. Well, essentially, this is what we're doing. We're doing a repository for everybody's notebooks. And it's not like we want every detail in there, but we want the meaningful detail that leaves a meaningful trail for others. I mean, all of us right now know just how valuable Google is and all these other search engines are. I mean, you can find information at the tip of your fingertip. But yet our databases, they have failed to be useful for us for that purpose. Do your folks immediately, when they get into a problem, and they know someone else worked on it, go to the database, say, hey, let's look at the histories? Do they do that today? Do you do that today? And if you don't, why not? What's going on? If someone else worked on it before, that's where it should be, and you should be able to find that information very quickly. Closing work orders. This continues to be a problem with database systems. Sometimes what happens is we either have duplicate work orders, or sometimes we have work orders that just never get closed. They get issued. Someone doesn't go back and audit to see what's left open and why is it open, and we don't keep it cleaned up, and we don't close those work orders out. I mean, you even have situations where you get so many open work orders and you don't even know what's open and what's closed anymore. I've seen situations where people just close them all, just to clean it up. But this should be an ongoing, regular process. I mean, it should be really a weekly process, possibly a daily process, for sure a monthly process. But you know, as an HFL leader, you should see how many open work orders do I have, and why are they open, and are they duplicates, or what's going on here, and get them closed. Sometimes they've been closed, but nobody, either they turned in the work order and they got lost, or they didn't turn in the work order. But anyway, look at it. You got to stay on top of open work orders and know how many are sitting there hanging out there. And this kind of goes along with scrubbing the data. So when it comes to data entry, you always have to be scrubbing the data. You have to be going through and looking at your PMs and your work orders and your entry control, and you got to be cleaning the data up. Sometimes people will enter on an entry control a piece of equipment, but they'll name it wrong, or they'll actually put it in the wrong group, or the wrong use the wrong name or title for it, or maybe even assign the wrong procedure for it. And hopefully your staff is engaged enough that they'll see that and say, hey, by the way, you know, I found out that I went to do this PM and it was assigned to the wrong sheet, or maybe it's on the wrong schedule or the wrong frequency. But that kind of scrubbing goes on regularly, and if you scrub the data regular and you keep it nice and tight and things tend to function, then people will use it. So when it comes to data entry is so critical to making sure that you can develop good reports. And so you have to spend time. But once you get this rolling, once people get into that routine, you don't spend a lot of time on this. It just becomes sort of a natural ebb and flow of the way your department will operate. So think about that when it comes to data entry. It's a critical piece, and I just wanted to reinforce that. Defining meaningful reports. This is, again, a very critical item. You need to know what is meaningful, what is intentional. When you do reports, I mean, we can, you know, there's all kinds of canned reports. I mean, when you get a database and you get a, one of these vendors will tell you they'll have hundreds of reports that you can print. And that could actually be a bit of a disaster if you don't sit there and stop and say, well, what's meaningful, what's useful? What really measures or what supports my priorities? Or in this case, the organizational priorities. Does your organization have very specific priorities? You know, are your administrators, because of what's going on in healthcare, you know, and everybody having to, quote, enhance the bottom line, you know, do they have certain priorities? And if they do, can you align your reports with those priorities? You know, your department should have priorities, or goals, I should say even. And what are your department's priorities and goals? Is it training? You know, is it, maybe it could be you want to do more cross-training. And so you really need to, you can use your database to help you with cross-training or ongoing training. You know, or maybe it's, you know, you really want to do a better job with customer service and get, you know, and how can you do that? Or maybe your priority is, you know, just getting to your PMs. I know that room PMs can be a challenge, and they should be a priority for all of us. And then you have staff priorities. Again, we'll go back to training again. Very often staff will say that they don't feel like they get adequate training. Or, you know, we're supposed to be competency-based in healthcare. You know, are they getting good competency-based training? Or maybe the staff will say, you know what, we feel like we're always repairing something all the time, and why don't we replace it? Again, what's meaningful to the staff? You know, again, maybe it's an informational issue. You know, we don't feel like we have the right drawings, or we don't have, you know, we can never find valves, or we don't have confidence in, you know, maybe again, a certain system. So, you know, what is a report that can help you and help your staff move forward? Business priorities. And you'll hear this as a thread constantly in HFL. You know, we're needing to run our departments like businesses. And your department, if you look at your budget, it's a pretty sizable budget if you run facilities and operate. The operational budget just from energy alone is a sizable amount in every organization. And then you get into your repair parts and your contracts and your staffing and everything else, and next thing you know, you're really one of the more expensive departments in the organization. So you have to run that department like a business. And you can use reports to do that, to demonstrate that. So you need to sit there and think, you know, what are the important priorities of my department? You know, what is it I want to measure and be intentional about that will help me as a leader demonstrate my leadership, and to be able to provide good information to folks that might take a look and analyze my operations. So we're going to look at some report examples, and we'll go into some of these in more detail. Obviously, we always talk about productivity, and what is productivity? I mean, that's one of those things, and that's a curse word. It's a four-letter word to some people, productivity, but it doesn't need to be, nor should it be. And really, the best way to look at productivity is showing your value. I mean, that's at the bottom line. That's exactly what you want to do. You want to show folks your value. We always, early on in my days in clinical engineering, we would do value-added services. You know, the things that we did that nobody, quote weren't even really part of our job description, where we just help folks, because we were doing that all the time. We were doing things that were just outside of our scope of work. And so we would show value-added services. Maybe with certain projects we could have contracted out, but we did in-house to reduce cost. Maybe it was even helping things that had nothing to, maybe it was training sessions that we did for nursing or otherwise. Also, you know, contracts. It's always good to you know, manage and monitor your contracts and have a good understanding of how rich your contracts are and what percentage of your operating cost are contracts. Even monitoring, you know, the value of a contract. In some contracts, you know, you may pay a lot of money for the contract, but yet you get very little in return for it. And maybe that's a contract that maybe you would consider taking in-house, and vice versa. Maybe you have contracts that maybe you need a contract because you put a lot of man hours and time into a certain function, but you can get a contract that would cover it at a lower expense or more efficiently. Replacement decisions is another one. You know, you want to make a decision on when equipment is going to be replaced. Well, how do you do that? But you can use reports for that. Quality, which is a big subject, and we'll go into that in more detail in a little bit. Repeat service calls, another great thing to monitor. Training, again, that could become a report, a regular report, and that might be something you could use for your users. They might be very interested in that. User issues, again, we're talking about user issues. We're talking about reports where basically the clinicians or the folks in the hospital may have had training issues or made an error, and you want to track that. And also under safety, I have could not duplicates, user error. Again, like user error, user issue, same thing. Could not duplicates, similar. You know, when they call you out to look at something and you can't find anything wrong with it, there's something going on there. It could be the equipment, it could be an intermittent problem, but also could be training. And then investigations. Something I didn't put in here, but we'll talk about in a little bit too, is utility failures and things like that. So if you have, you know, internal life safety or ICRA or utility failures, I mean, that should be a report that you do on a regular basis. You know, so we can continue to talk about safety issues and, you know, downtime and so on and so forth. So let's talk about some of these in some detail. First one we're going to talk about is productivity. And again, I think very often, fortunately or unfortunately, however you look at it, a lot of people think that that's the sole reason why you want databases is productivity. And while it's an important reason to have a database, and it can help you, especially in a larger organization, especially with benchmarking and such, it certainly is not the sole reason. But I think, you know, we need to get over the idea that we're allowed to just run our departments without justifying them. We have to accept the idea that there is not even hardly a segment in society anymore that doesn't have to justify or demonstrate its value. You know, I think those days, while there's some very positive things to say about those days where, you know, if you kept the lights on and, you know, kept the water running, hey, you were doing your job and that was good enough. And if you were nice at the same time about it, hey, that was even better. But that's just changed, and it's been changing. And even if you have an environment that's like that, you still want to run your department like a business, and you still want to be able to demonstrate value in a very concrete way. So here's some examples of some productivity reports. And again, as we go through these examples, I am not by any means saying that you should do all of these. What I'm saying is that you should consider which ones are valuable and meaningful and demonstrate to your administration or your corporate office or your report or whoever it is your value. And trust me, these change too. Some of these may last forever. You may use them, you know, every month for the rest of your career, but they should change, or you should innovate and come up with new reports that demonstrate new value and also, as we will go through this, help you improve your processes. So here's the first one, man hours per square foot. Pretty simple report. How many man hours per square foot of your facility, or you could also say how much FTE per square foot, or cost per square foot for your staff. Again, this is one of those benchmarks that's out there. We talk about it all the time in the industry. Now you can get down to what is a square foot, because some people measure roof inside their square foot. People always go over, well, what about acute care versus outpatient versus medical office building versus business office building? How does that all equate? And those are variations when it comes to healthcare. But again, no measure is perfect. What you try to do is you try to standardize as best you can, and then what happens is through many facilities, similar sized or otherwise, you start to get a better picture of how you benchmark. But a very simple one is man hours per square foot. Wrench time, and again, we're going to talk about this in a little more detail now. Like I was saying, the amount of time that you actually spend doing the job and actually turning the wrench is truly wrench time. And I put down here, I read a couple things and I researched a little bit, and they say that wrench time averages about 30 to 40% of the time. So going back to our illustration, if you're there at the hospital working an 8-hour shift and you got your half-hour lunch unpaid, a couple of 15-minute breaks, so you end up with 7.5 hours of potential productive time. Well, so how much time is that then of actual wrench time? Well, that works out to about 2.1 to about 2.5 hours to 3 hours. So 2.5 to 3 hours of wrench time. And it doesn't sound like a lot, does it? I mean, it sounds like, oh wow, that's not a great number. Well, here's the value of that number. Think about how you can then start to drill down to improving it. If we use the next line, which is total time, that's mobilization to completion, which again, in that situation, typically you're trying to run about 75 to 80%, and you're using bookend to bookend, so the time to mobilize, get the work order till we turn the work order in. And that number is a little bit better. So 75 to 80% would be about 6 hours a day. So maybe 6.5 hours of quote what you might call productive time. That really, actually, that number is there's so many. It's such a grossed up number that it may be a little bit harder to adjust it or move it. Very commonly, what I have seen when we do total time is people sort of paper whip their time. I mean, they put a half hour for everything or an hour for everything, and it grosses up to sometimes more than actually 7.5 hours a day very often, or they account for every minute of the day, so they always turn in 7.5 hours, so they account for all day long. And I don't know that there's a lot of value in that. So what is that what are you really going to do with that information, that data? Okay, you're going to have a great report that says, hey, look at us, we're 80, 90% productive all the time. Well, can you improve processes with that number? Probably not. You could still, but probably not as well. When you come to wrench time now, and you say, hey, our wrench time averages 32%. Okay, that's about 2.2 hours a day of actually doing the job. Well, now you have something to really look at. You're saying, okay, if our average is 32%, and I have some folks that are wrench timing it at 45%, and I have some folks that are wrench timing at 20%, well, right there you've got something to look at. Why is it, the wrench time is so much lower for someone or so much higher? And there could be very good explanations for it. Or maybe not. It could be the technical job, or it could be, if someone just changes light bulbs all the time. But let's use light bulbs again as the example. Let's say that you take and you analyze light bulb replacement. And I gave an illustration earlier where someone takes and they get the work order, they go mobilize, they get the light bulbs, they transfer down to the location they're going to do the light bulbs, they replace the light bulb, and then they come back and they turn in the work order. Well, let's say that it takes that person 40 minutes to do all that. Okay, just use 40 minutes. We could use 20 or 30, I suppose, but let's use 40. Well, let's say that 35 minutes of that was getting to the light bulb. So here you have 35 minutes, a person getting the work order, mobilizing, going down to the mechanical room where they keep the light bulbs, getting the light bulbs, putting them on the cart, or maybe you already have a cart set up, rolling the cart down to the department. They get to the department, and they can't quite get to it just right that minute because, maybe there's a user in the way or something like that. But they have a conversation, and they wait a little bit, 5 or 10 minutes, and then they get the ladder over there, finally, and do the light bulb in 5 minutes. Replace it. Boom, boom, done. And they go back. Turn in the work order, 40 minutes. Okay. Well, if you take your wrench time of 5 minutes, and you have your 35 minutes of transition and everything else, what's your productivity rate for that person, for that one service action? Well, you take 5 into 40, and that's 8. Divide that into 100, works out to about 12 and a half, I guess, a piece. And you take 5 times 12, or you take that's 12.5% productivity. So you had 12.5% productivity for that one transaction. Now, if you do multiple transactions like that over a given period of time, what do you think your efficiency wrench time rate is going to be for light bulb changing? Let's say a quick job is 15 or 20 minutes, but yet a 5-minute replacement. Well, that's still only going to be a 25% productivity rate. And if you start averaging it all out, what you end up with is, hey, when I do light bulbs, my productivity rate for light bulb changing is like 15%. Well, that just doesn't look very good for that person doing light bulb changing, because he does it as needed, on the spot. Whereas let's say somebody's doing a different kind of repair consistently, or PM work for that matter. They go out and they do PM work, and they line up their PMs. Well, their wrench time is going to be sitting at 60, 70% because they're more doing the actual work. But going back to the light bulb situation, let's change the paradigm. Let's sit there and say that what we do is we do area replacement. Now what we do is we don't replace just one light bulb at a time. We replace light bulbs, okay, in whole sections. So we plan it, and we organize it, and we go into an area, and we replace, 50 light bulbs. Well, let's say that planning and organizing takes us, let's say, 2 hours. That sounds like a long time to me, but let's say it does. So that's calling the manager and making sure we get to the space and everything else, and scheduling the time and getting the date and getting all the light bulbs together and everything else. So let's say we spend 2 hours planning replacing the light bulbs in an area and getting the light bulbs. And then we go to that area and we replace those 50 light bulbs. And let's say it takes us, 5 minutes a light bulb. That could be long, could be not, but that's 5 minutes a light bulb. So 5 times 50, that's 250 minutes, or 4 hours, roughly. So we spend 4 hours replacing light bulbs, wrench time, 4 hours. But we spent 2 hours planning. So that's 6 total hours we spent on that project. What is our average wrench time now? Well, it's gone up to almost 70%, or 66%, depending on how you want to do the math. So 70% wrench time versus 15% average wrench time. Wow, what a big shift. So when you look at wrench time, and you really break down wrench time, you can move, and you can analyze a little better, and you can change your processes, maybe things that make more sense. So this is just an example of where maybe you want to collect wrench time for productivity, and you want to change your processes. And what you end up doing is, because you do that, guess what? Not only you're more productive, but you start getting more time to do other things. One of my other favorite sort of wrench time analysis things to do, actually we're going to talk about that a little bit later, has to do with zone maintenance. So I'll save that. But again, then there's total time, another report. Again, not that it's not valuable, but does it really get you where you want to go? And what does it tell you? How are your staff filling out their work orders? Again, work order time per tech. Once you start getting to these numbers, then you can start looking at them individually, and maybe it's the kind of work that they're doing. Maybe, again, when we say similar class, if you have someone that's always doing projects, or you have someone that's always doing PMs versus someone who's always doing repairs, those are 3 different classes. And so it's hard to compare them to each other, but within each group, you can start to get more comparison. If you have people that are constantly doing repairs all the time, they could be very similar. You might even break those repairs down to general repairs versus, complex repairs. But again, if you have lots of folks and you're recording data right, it's easy to get this information out. And you can learn if you maybe it's a new person or maybe they need training or something like that. But very often you'll see folks are kind of clumped pretty close together by class, and occasionally you'll see a flyer. What I would see very often is that people go through cycles. They literally in life, people just go through cycles. They tend to lose focus, and they tend to become a little less functional sometimes. And these are great opportunities to sit down and just coach. And what I have found when I've done that, because I'm paying attention and I know I'm paying attention, it corrects itself immediately. Immediate response time, again, another productivity report. When people are responding quickly to calls, or they're getting to a phone call or a service call at a certain percentage rate consistently, that tells you a lot about your productivity. In some cases, if you're really, really busy and it's really crazy, that'll go down, that'll drop, because you have so many projects that have dropped in. We have time to get to things right away. We have to put them off. Well, that could also be telling you something as well. And if that stays that way too long, then you're going to start getting customer complaints. So that's can be a nice number to look at. And by and large, you'll have a certain percentage that you'll settle in as being normal. Like 30% of the time, we get to something within 5 to 10 minutes. But if it starts to go too low, there's something going on. If it starts to go too high, there's something going on. Maybe there's not enough work. Maybe if you are just waiting for service calls, that could be a problem as well. Completion within X minutes. Again, I put X here. Again, it's a variable. Is there a certain amount of percentage where people need to be getting things done consistently? Again, closing out work orders. And there is a percentage, there's a number. And some of this data becomes more powerful with time. And also what it does is it helps you see variations that are going on in your operations. Very often when big projects come in, that's when you see these big variations. All of a sudden, they've delivered gobs of furniture, or you have all of this construction going on. So your folks are not paying attention to the maintenance and the operations as much anymore. I mean, they're very much paying attention just to projects more. It takes away from these other measures. But when you're looking at them and you see that shift, you want to get back to normal. So they help you say, hey, wow, we're really shifting. We're really not responding to work orders very quickly anymore. We're really not completing things within an hour or half an hour like we normally do, so on and so forth. And so when you do that, you realize, hey, we moved way far away. How can we fight our way back? Or sometimes, unfortunately, the organizations go through enough change, you come up with new norms. The numbers just change. But you see them change, you know why they changed, and you define new norms. So these are just some examples of productivity, and these are some of the reports that you can pull out of databases, but they've got to be set up correctly to get to this information. And you got to know where you're going and what you want to measure. The next one, and this is kind of short, but replacement decision reporting. We often talk about how things are getting old in our buildings, and we talk about how we got all this old equipment that needs to be replaced, and we do these capital justifications and prioritizations. I've been through so many of those where you sit there and you pull together X million dollars worth of operational or capital replacement equipment, and then they come back and say, well, pick your top 5, and you have 30 that need to be in your top 5, and prioritize them, and then you get 2. It was always such a fun exercise. And so you go through that exercise. But for me, you can take this as go around that process, if you will, and you can actually support that process by using your database. And you can trend repair costs for equipment over time. In other words, just like a car or anything else, if you start having to repair something more and more and more, and its value is going down and down and down, and its risk is going up and up and up, well, we got these lines, we all have these lines that cross each other, where it becomes to the point we say, you know what, we just got to get a new car. And it's pretty obvious to us that we have to do it. And if our database is set up right, we can do the exact same thing. And again, this is a great time to do a little risk assessment on equipment, especially stuff that starts adding up. So basically, you start getting more repair cost. You start spending more man hours. You got a certain age. And then you have a certain risk, inherent risk either to safety or patients or operations or revenue or something. And then you also have technology advancements. Sometimes the replacement equipment is so much more efficient than the existing equipment that you could even come up with a return on investment by purchasing it. So if you do like a cost analysis, like there's a risk assessment, and you kind of pull this information together, and you walk in front of the administrator, hey, look, it's costing us this. Our man hours are this. The age is this. The risk is it. It's almost like a no-brainer, and they're going like, oh, wow, yeah. I mean, this is like a car with 300,000 miles that's costing us, $1,000 a month to operate now. Well, hopefully you'll never get to that point. But maybe it's a 180,000 mile vehicle that's starting to add up, and you don't want to go through all these major repairs and everything else on it, and it's time to buy a new one. So again, a good database can help you do this. You can set up triggers, and you can just look at specifics, and it'll help you to not have to generate that list of 50 items to replace when you're only going to get 2 or 3 during that capital process. Quality report examples. Again, this is a heavy one, and again, there are many things you can measure for quality, and you need to just come down to what are the ones that are really going to, quote, help you shape, promote, and improve your area of responsibility. PM completion is just a standard one. It's one that never goes away, particularly when you break PM completions down to risk 1 and ICRA and interim life safety type PMs, things where things are very critical that need to be 100%. And then you have your the ones that are not critical, but yet you want to maintain a high PM rate on the other equipment. Work order completion, again, another standard report. These are the two that you see most frequently for most people's quality reports. What's your completion rate? But again, this is only as good as your data entry and your closing of reports and staying up on open reports and such. Now you get into some other ones that could measure quality. Work order completion within a specific time frame. We talked about that earlier. Again, it does measure quality when you get to things efficiently and quickly and close them down quickly. You'll never get to 100% of closing everything down right away, but you can certainly have a pretty good number, and that can give you a pretty good indication of when your folks are pretty much staying engaged. Work orders open beyond a certain time period, 7, 14, 21 days. Again, every maintenance department has hard to get to work orders. If I've seen it once, I've seen it many times where you have a certain issue in a certain room, and it's a busy department, and getting to that room can be difficult. And if we don't have good systems and processes or good communication with the department, or let's say with bed control, I have found that to be the answer in most cases, that usually most hospitals have somebody that has a person that's in charge of bed control. I mean, if you build a good relationship with bed control and you let them know, hey, room 227, we need to get to that room. When it discharges, if you would, quote, not put someone in there and then let us know, we can get this problem taken care of. It's amazing how work orders will come in about a problem in a room, but yet they will not close the room or give us the room. Now, maybe some of you are in facilities where that's not the case. But again, what happens when we don't get to these work orders, sometimes they can linger. I've seen one of the worst examples I ever saw was in an ICU department, and it was an old process that didn't work very well. They had done it this way for a long time. The technicians would go to the board, pull the work order, go up to the department, room was not available. They make a little tick on the work order saying not available, put it back on the board, and repeat. And repeat and repeat and repeat and repeat. And this would just go on and on and on and on and on. And it would go on for months, literally months. And then it get to the point where they probably throw the work order away, and then it would just start over. It was just, I saw enough times, and put a very simple process in place where I said to the technicians, if you go up to the space and you can't get to the room, you take the work order, you don't put it back on the board, you put it in this little box over here. The manager will see that, and they will coordinate the room for you and make it available for you. And it was that simple. And next thing you know, we pretty much were not having these extended work orders anymore. And then later on, as we got into the database, we start using these open work orders like this here, 7, 14, 21 days, and we start monitoring how many work orders are open more than, let's say, 7 or 14 days. And usually there's just a handful, so we would get more focused on those and get those closed out. And we went from having work orders normally open for months at a time to really having very few work orders open more than a week or two. Repeat work requests, again, another good quality report. If people are going back to the same location, same equipment, it's good to know. Again, it could be a training issue. It could be just a communication issue. But it does help to measure quality. Put in above ceiling permit issues and variances. Again, we may want to know every time we issue a above ceiling permit, and that should be a work order. That way we can identify the number of times we're going above the ceiling. We can track it. And again, as we continue to talk about barrier management and ICRA and inland life safety and so on and so forth, it could be a meaningful measure of quality. Unscheduled downtime for specific equipment, business function. Again, the administrators and your folks who are in accounting might very well want to know how long things are down that affect revenue. And so, I put unscheduled here. I'm assuming that scheduled, that when you schedule things downtime, everybody knows it's done at a time that is coordinated with the department and it works with your revenue cycle. But unscheduled can be very, very bad for the business. And so again, places like MRI or CT or any kind of an imaging room or any kind of room that produces revenue, tracking unscheduled downtime for areas like that could be, again, it could demonstrate good maintenance and good service and good follow-up, but also could bring attention to a problem. And when folks understand that it's affecting the bottom line, typically that's going to get more attention quicker. Mean time between failure rates, again, this is one of those kind of data-driven reports for sure, and calculated reports. How often, how frequently do things fail? This kind of report can help you, again, justify replacement. If something is failing more frequently and the average is going up, it can certainly help you get replacement. On the flip side, if the failure rate, mean time between failure rates, is extremely low, in other words, you go months, maybe even, let's say, years between failure rates, it could help you adjust your preventive maintenance schedules. You can say, you know what, maybe we don't need to be doing this PM every month. Maybe we can go every 2 months or every 6 months. But that kind of data can help you not just with quality or demonstrate quality, but it can also help you with operations and productivity. Utility, life safety, ICRA systems. Again, if you have any of these systems that fail, you really should be generating a report and a summary for these things, and they do definitely help indicate quality issues. These are very complex systems, and sometimes it takes just drawing some attention and then trying to break it down from the forest to the trees to the branches to see what's exactly going on, and if something needs some attention. So these are just examples of quality reports that you can do. There are more. Again, as I've said before, I'm not suggesting that you do all of these, but you might need to do some of these, and you might actually, and again, you may think of some other reports, I'm certain, that you can do when it comes to quality. User training examples, again, kind of a short one here, but the staff, and I have found is staff really do often feel like they don't get enough training or consistent training or thorough training. And using your database is a good way to help solve that in a very measurable way. Just like a PM, training should be a PM. It's something that needs to happen on a regular cycle. Maybe you have asbestos awareness training, or maybe you have med gas training, or maybe you want to do lockout tagout training or confined space training. And and you need all your staff or some of your staff to go through this. Well, you can schedule all this, and you can track it, and you can make it so that it lets you know ahead of time, maybe a month or 2 or 3, so you can get it scheduled, and you get it documented. Or what you do is you make it the responsibility of the technician. Sometimes what happens is you may have a computer module they need to take, and so what happens is a piece of paper prints out and it gets assigned to them, and just like every other PM, they have to get it done within a certain amount of time. And if they don't, it shows up on your report as being open, and you can talk to that person. And of course, you can you can use that to track completion rates for training, and you can keep things kind of going. I find that training gets behind all the time. It's also a good way to document weekly training. If you're doing in-services every week, you can sit there and document your in-services. And very often it's very helpful, especially when your staff say, well, I was never told that. You can say, well, here's the PM and you signed off on it, and I guess you were, but let's go ahead and do another in-service, and so on and so forth. So And you can even use this training system to improve your training. So if you're doing training and it's not having any impact, or the staff seem to be forgetting, maybe you need to increase the frequency or change the training program. And again, I love the idea of tying these to annual reviews, because it gives you an opportunity to talk about all the training that was done every year. And I think that really does help folks understand that you're investing in them and they're part of everything. So again, your database can be very valuable in doing this, and it can help engage your staff in and being part of the solution, and not just complaining about how they don't get adequate training or not enough training or they were not trained. Financial examples, again, another very, very important part of justifying and valuing and showing your value and actually speaking the language of your administration and your accounting folks. And they really, really want to know what's it costing, and then are you paying attention to your operations and really helping them be successful by enhancing the bottom line. Contract costs and benchmarks, again, they're out there. Facilities by and large do all have some contracts, and again, contracts sometimes are a necessary requirement or a necessary evil, or just something to help you survive. I mean, in these times of staff being realigned and reduced, very often what we end up doing is we end up purchasing more contracts. And it's a good way to demonstrate how we're not necessarily enhancing our service, but we're just shifting cost. And it is not unusual for administrative and corporate environments to rather have a contract versus staffing. And by tracking it, you can sometimes help influence the decision. I mean, I know in more than one occasion in the past, I was able to demonstrate that a contract was going to cost infinitely more than my either the current contract that I had or than the staff that was doing the job. And it was just quick math. It was like, okay, you want to get this contract for $100,000 and I'm doing it for $47,000. What do you want to do? And the answer was always pretty simple. We like $47,000. As long as my numbers were good, it worked out pretty well. I even had situations where we went to a corporate contract for elevators, and they, it sounded like a great idea. Let's put everything under one contract with one elevator company. Well, not only did I have a contract with my local elevator company that was significantly lower, I also had a elevator technician that only lived a few minutes from the hospital, whereas the company they were going to, which we had actually been with before, they weren't close at all. And we had all kinds of service issues with them. And so basically between service and contract cost and everything else, we were the only facility that didn't have to go with the corporate contract. And sometimes that's hard to do, is to go your own way when you got a corporate contract coming down. So contract and cost and benchmarks, again, if you've got data and you're able to benchmark that. Energy kind of goes without saying, although candidly there's lots of opportunity here. Tracking your energy costs and benchmarking against other organizations, it can be extremely valuable for you as a manager. Parts and supply costs per square foot, again, we're always constantly trying to find out, are we, do we have too much inventory? Is always the thing. Are we being efficient with what we have? We go through so many consumable parts in maintenance and operations, particularly when it comes to belts and filters and light bulbs. I mean, those three areas alone, they're a huge part of our bottom line, and we need to constantly be looking at them. And also we need to be looking at our other things like supplies, like bolts and nuts. And, again, there's a lot of movement out there about having standardized systems out there where companies come in and they actually, quote, give you all the cabinets and they give you all the shelves and they stock it for you. In some cases, you pay for all that stock. In other cases, you only pay for what you use. But I'm kind of an advocate of that, because what I have seen in the past is that to a certain degree, maintenance departments tend to be a little bit on the hoarding side. If we need one, we'll get 10, just because you just never know. And unless you're managing that really well, you could have a tremendous amount of inventory sitting there that will never be used. FTE cost per square foot, again, pretty straightforward. FTE cost per discharge, again, when you say per discharge, you start putting it in the language of the accounting department. When you use costs based upon numbers or based upon verbiage language that the administration is used to looking at, they start to understand that, hey, you get it. You understand, if it's per discharge or per, patient days or something like that, or per procedure. And if you start getting your language to their language and they see that you're invested that way, it certainly can elevate and really get you a seat at the table, like we always talk about. A building specific expense, hours, for example, if you have 50 buildings that you take care of, and different kind of buildings, and you track the expense per each of those buildings, that can be a very valuable tool, and also can help your administration know what it's costing to actually own a building, and maybe help you make decisions on capital replacements and so on and so forth. Zone maintenance versus normal maintenance. We may actually make this a module down the road here within HFL maybe 240, and this is a big discussion. We know, when is it right to go zone versus routine or normal maintenance plan? And when I say normal maintenance plan, I'm talking about just you have people who take work orders. They take work orders for all around the building or whatever area, and they come in and they go to the board and they they go over wherever they're needed, and that's the way it works. Zone maintenance, on the other hand, is when you actually assign people to certain areas. And my sense is something like this: and I've seen it work pretty well, when you start to get a specific area that starts to require a lot of attention. Let's say you have a certain part of the building, a certain floor and area that you look at your work orders for that area, and you see that you have 2,000 man hours in repairs and service in an area. When you get to that point, something like that, that is absolutely prime to turn into zone maintenance. Because if you have that many hours being dedicated to a specific building or an area, and you go ahead and you put someone up there, and you allocate someone to that space like that, they're going to take that 2,000 hours just because mobilization alone, and because of knowledge of the area and the people, and they're going to knock that 2,000 hours down to, they may knock it to half. They'll spend a lot less time taking care of the same level of problems because they're just going to be that much more efficient. Now, there are definitely some downsides to zone maintenance, and I have seen them. And again, I think we can talk about this, in another. Actually, we really do need to talk about these two concepts as part of our program, because they really are a big decision. And again, as organizations change, your method changes. But it also would be again, your database can help you get to when is the change needed, and when do you make the adjustment. Zone lamp replacement, again, I talked about that in some detail. This goes back to what I was saying before, collecting data on lamp replacement. So if you have a good code in your database for lamp replacements, and all of us should, and then what happens is, at the end of the month or the year, whatever, you're tabulating this, and you find out that, gosh, we spent X hundreds or thousands of hours replacing lamps. Well, let's go back to that wrench time consideration. You can almost guarantee that you could reduce that time in half if you went to a zone replacement process, and and it would pay for the lamps. I mean, that's one of the the downsides we talk about in terms of replacing lamps is, well, gosh, when you replace one lamp at a time, and when you replace all the lamps, that's going to be a lot more expensive than replacing one lamp when it burns out, running it to fail. Well, maybe. When you take the man hours and you start to look at the man hours versus the cost of the lamps, you find out very quickly that replacing all those lamps is much less expensive than the man hours you're spending to replace them one at a time. And so it becomes a pretty easy decision for many organizations to say it's cheaper to replace the lamps every 2 years or every year or whatever we're going to do, whatever cycle, whatever the lamp hour life is, than it is to replace them on an as-needed basis. So again, good financial example, and there are many others like that that can help you better manage financially and demonstrate that you're managing financially your business. Okay, so we spent a lot of time here now looking at the lead up to really what gets down to Well, we're getting close to the end here, but database reporting packages. When you look at a database, there really are three type of reports that you want to know or want to be able to extract from the database. And I break it down to these three categories: analytics, reports, and dashboards. So let's jump right into it. Analytics. Analytics are pretty much your trend lines, your pie charts, your bar graphs. In front of this is raw data, just the numerics, just raw numbers. But when you get to analytics, it's the stuff that you get to look at and analyze. This allows you to see trends and variances. You may use histograms or bar graphs or different variation of bar graphs or pies or line graphs to analyze the direction of your data. Is it stable? Is it completing 90% consistently? Are we hitting 100% consistently? Is my project repair corrective or PM percentages balanced? Are we shifting to a lot more project and a lot less repair? So this is analytics. It's the data being crunched into this kind of a format so you can analyze it. And to be candid, in my career, I kind of thought analytics was a high level. This is the information I presented at high level meetings, and I have since learned, of course, that this is really information that you use so you can analyze and make decisions. This is more internal. It can be used for meetings and other things, but typically, most folks, this is too much information, which is kind of funny because the raw data back in the day is the information I thought was a little too much information, and I thought this was the easy high level stuff. But it turns out that even graphs and bar graphs and pie charts sometimes can be a little too much data for making decisions and with decision makers. But from analytics to reports. And this is, again, once you've taken a look at your data and you've looked at your graphs, your graphs and your charts and your pies, you need to combine analytics with a summary. You need to say, what is it saying? What direction is it going? Why did it change? What happened here? When you see a variance or a trend, you really need to drill deeper, and you need to look at the raw data and find out what is it. And then you need to make your expert opinion or summary. And these summaries don't need to be long. In fact, they really shouldn't be long. They should be pretty much maybe never more than a paragraph. Occasionally, maybe more, dependent upon if there's a lot more technical stuff going on there. You need to explain. But really, as a HFL leader, you get the data, you look at the data, you summarize the data, you analyze it. And these are the kind of reports that then go up to folks like the safety committee, or your continuous CQI, continuous quality improvement committee, or maybe your risk committees. Probably all three in some cases. But this is the information that you report up. You report these summaries, and you usually report these on some kind of a regular basis. I guess safety committees are meant to meet at least 6 times a year. Most frequently, they often meet 12 times a year. But this is the kind of report that should be going to that committee, every month. And you should be writing those summaries. And at the end of the year, it makes it very easy to look at the history, and also makes it much easier to see trends. The next is dashboards. And dashboards really are, it seems like a catchphrase today, and I know many of you have heard it or seen it and experienced it, but they're very, very visual. It's high level, and when we say high level, we're talking about this is the type of stuff that is really going to your administrators or to people who just don't have time for data. They just want to see a quick reference, and they want to make decisions. This is very decision driven, a very high level decision driven, decision making. So dashboards are designed to, again, be not so much. What's funny is it takes a lot of data to get to a dashboard, and I'm going to give you a couple examples of dashboards now. Okay, let's start looking at a dashboard example now. First thing you notice when you look at this dashboard is you notice the colors. You see the green, yellow, and red. I'll tell you one thing that I would change about this dashboard already initially looking at it is I would put the green, yellow, and red all to the same side if it were possible. You'll notice that some of these have the green to the left and some of them have the red to the left. But I would actually change that however I could. I would make sure that was consistently, so that way even visually it looks the same. But having done that, the first thing we're going to want to do is we're going to look at red. What's red? So what do we see first in red? Well, let's look at the first column here. And you notice the second row, you got this PM work order completion versus open, sitting at 34%, target's 95%, and the variance is, wow, 61%. So what's going on here? Well, it could be a simple example, a simple question. This is could be a weekly dashboard, and this is the first week of the month. Or maybe it's the second week of the month. Or maybe it's the third week of the month, or maybe it's the end of the month. I hope this is not the end of the month, because if it is, then guess what? We got a major issue with getting PMs done. If it's the first week of the month, I would be quite satisfied. I had a PM program called 30, 60, 90. We would complete 30% the first week, 60 the second, 90 the third, and 10% the last week. Because the last 10% were always the hardest to get to, and if you save too many PMs for the last week of the month, which often happened, you start pushing away all your corrective work orders and everything else. And what happened is, your first week of the next month, you'd be caught catching up work orders again and get behind all over again. So if this were the second week of the month, and it would be my 30, 60, 90 program, I would actually be changing things right now. We'd say, okay, folks, this week we're going to have some additional overtime, or we're going to reschedule, or we're going to reshuffle staffing, or we're going to put more people. We would make changes. There would be action based upon this number if this were the second, third, fourth, or really, if this was at the end of the month, we've got a major problem. We got to figure out what happened last month. And hopefully it didn't wait till last month, the month to get over it, to realize that we were down this far on PMs. The second red indicator is over here. And we're sitting here, this is mean time between failure. Now, I'm not sure what system we're talking about here. Maybe it's utilities. And that would make sense. Maybe this is utility mean time between failure rate. I certainly wouldn't want frequent failures in utilities, although we probably would expect it. You notice the current value it's 32 days, target is 90 days, and the variance is 58. But again, let's say it's utilities, and let's say what's going on here is we're into a stormy period. It's spring. Well, maybe this is not the right target value, or maybe it is. But whatever it is, it's in the red, and I'd want a summary and explanation of what's going on with this one. And hopefully there would be a good data, good detail as to why we're sitting there at that rate. Next thing we're going to do is we're going to look at the yellow. First one we see is over here, overtime versus regular hours. And current value is 13%, the target's 9%, and the variance here actually should be, well, actually target's 5%, and the variance is 8%. And actually, you know, I'm a little surprised. Well, that's not too bad, I guess. But again, it's something to keep an eye on. You know, we certainly want to try to adjust that if we can, and maybe there's a normal explanation. Maybe we had vacation time going on. Maybe we had some type of an outage. Again, if I go back and I look at my mean time between failure rate over here, maybe these are tied together. Maybe we had an outage or utility outage that required more overtime. So they work perfectly together. That makes some sense. The next one we see that's in yellow is over here, and that is work orders overdue. And again, the current value is 103, and the target is 15 work orders. And the variance is pretty significant. We're looking at 88 work orders that are beyond our target value. Wow, okay. So again, we see here that our PMs are behind. We have a bunch of extra work orders. So what's going on here? Maybe, again, maybe we need overtime, and maybe that's why our overtime is even maybe eking up a little bit. We're eking up overtime because it's going to go a little higher maybe because we have our behind on our PMs, we have a lot of work orders overdue. So, and if you notice over here where we're not in the yellow, actually, we actually are based on our target. We're on the edge here, backlog hours. So we can see with the backlog hours that we're getting behind. So what does this dashboard tell us? Well, it tells us we got some operational variances going on. and maybe we need to make some adjustments right now. In fact, we would need to make some adjustments right now, and we need to get we need to let the administration know, or our report know, that we're going to be having to do some changes to get caught up. The other ones that are in green and meeting target, you can tell that, hey, okay, things are fine. No reason to discuss them unless somebody wants to discuss them. It looks like, if you want to look at those real quick, our total maintenance cost for budget, we're looking pretty good. We're actually under our target. If we look at our actual to estimate cost variance, again, we're doing pretty good. Our costs, we're managing our money. PM work orders overdue, again, we're doing well here. We're staying within our target. And then the last indicator over here, work orders waiting for approval. Again, we're a little bit over our target. Our target is 10. We're at 20. Variance is 10. Not a major concern. Again, we allow ourselves some room from target. So this is a good example of a dashboard. And again, it can help you make some quick decisions and make some quick adjustments. This here is a combination report. This combines all three elements that we talked about today. So if we look at here, we got our analytics. Here's our trend lines and our bar graphs, and we can see all these lines going. And actually, there's no trend lines here. These are just graphs month to month to month. And we can see, look at this. You see this red line here? Look at this over here. Uh-oh. Looks like it's trending. Boy, that's definitely trending. Now it's staying up here. What is that line? And then again, you can see the header down here, and I can't quite read that. But again, this was not a specific healthcare maintenance summary, but it is something that we would want to look at. What's going on there. And there's raw data. Okay, and it says here, it actually gives the term there. Looks like I'm not sure what that word is. But anyway, it looks like we definitely start trending up. We see the raw data 3, 4, 3, 6, 9, 12, 9, 12, 9, 9, 9, 8, 9, 9. And this says worst 5 equipment for month. And equipment for the top 5 low systems. So aligner, whatever the aligner is, needs some attention. And then we look over here, and we got some of our bar graphs or histograms, okay, giving us more data. And then that data is converted over into something that's a little more color-coded, drawing our attention to it. But then it draws itself up to a dashboard. And we can look at the dashboard, and again, look at our reds, and look at our yellows, and look at our greens, and we can start making some decisions. Maybe we need to make some adjustments. Maybe it's a normal variance. But whatever, no matter what, you need to explain it. So you would look at those reds, and you would explain what's going on here. And again, you'd want to let people know, is this a concern or is this not a concern? Do we need to pay attention to it? What do we need to do? And it gives you a very easy vehicle. But mind you, all of this is driven by what? Good data. So they go hand in hand. You can't do one really without the other. But imagine the power of these reports. Imagine the ability to influence good decisions and not have to walk into the room and just try to explain it verbally, or for that matter, walk into the room with, if you will, a bunch of data. Because again, people get kind of blurry-eyed when they look at data and graphs and charts. They don't necessarily can't interpret them. So you really need to be able to do these reports, and you need to be able to articulate and summarize reports like this. But again, as I've said more than once already, it's driven by excellent data. The next subject is decision making and follow-up, and we've been talking about that throughout as we looked at these reports. Again, you've got to understand a trend and a variance. When things are trending, because you're so operational, because you're looking at the data firsthand, because you understand the data, you need to explain and see the trends before anyone else does. And variances are a little different. Obviously, a lot of people can see that when something big happens, but again, is the variance something explainable? Is it something that could happen again? Was there a potential risk? What kind of risk is there? And what kind of action? And this should result in action. When you look at trends and variances, there should be some action. There has to be action. There has to be some intentional written justification or some change in process or some change in staffing or management or training. Something has to change when you see this. Again, a summary report may be all there needs to be, monitoring the situation for that matter, or very explainable. Again, changes in policies, improvement of processes, again, result in training, and it could also be results in discipline. This helps you to see if something is happening over and over and over again because someone is either intentionally or actively or passively aggressive on a situation, and I've seen all those. You need to follow up. It needs to result in a verbal conversation or a written conversation or decision-making leave or whatever it might escalate to. But again, it really does help you manage and bring people in and keep people moving in the right direction. But it's so critical to do something with the data. You have to do something with the data. Can't stress that enough. Last segment is summary and reporting up. Again, we talked about this a little bit earlier, but add a little bit to it. Now that you've done all of this great collection and analysis and you created these reports, and again, we talked, what do you do with them? Well, we talked about this already. Submit them to the committees. Send them up to safety, risk management, and quality. Communicate to hospital management. There are definitely times where you need to engage your hospital management because they're the ones that can talk to the people across the organization and maybe help you. Maybe there's an issue that's universal to the organization. I'll give you an example of one. We had a situation where, as strange as it may sound, we ran our own wastewater system and we actually supported part of a small little town. And one of the problems we had on a regular basis was a thing called Santa wipes or Sandy wipes. They're the white container with the red cap. They're used to wipe down equipment and other things to kill bacteria. Well, for some reason, even though they're never ever supposed to go down the drain and they're not supposed to be flushed down a toilet, that would happen, and they would go down our septic system, or not septic system, but our wastewater system, and they would show up in our plant. And those things are so effective at killing bacteria, they would cause damage to our plant because they would come down in such high numbers. And so what we started to do was we start collecting them. We'd fish them out of the system, and we kind of had like a count. And I would sit there and I would communicate, to the management, particularly in the clinical environment, the fact that we have problems with these things going down into the system. The speculation is that people were using the white bedpans and they were flushing it with the bedpan washers. But the thing is that we did see improvement, but we had to actually fish them out, count them. And I remember even at one point we actually took a person who was over bringing that product out to the wastewater facility to show them our bucket filled with these Santa wipes. But again, communicating information data forward is a way to get action, especially if you can show good trend and variances in data. Communicating to hospital administration, of course, there are many opportunities to create a dialogue and show them how to make good decisions to support the organization and enhance the bottom line and help you get the job done better. Communicate to vendors. This is one of those things where you can use the data and information to talk to your service organizations or your vendors coming in. Maybe it has to do with a compliance issue where they're not being compliant on something, and you can track, say, look, every time we get so-and-so in here, or when your crews come in, we have these compliance issues that we've been tracking, or our costs are going this direction, or we have all these return calls going on with this equipment. It doesn't get fixed right the first time, or our response time has been such. Again, opportunity for data to be used to communicate to vendors. Communicating to professional peers. Again, a great opportunity to educate each other. Even today, I'm assuming and hoping through this presentation, some of you are actually thinking to yourselves, wow, I've never ever thought to think, to do, or collect, or even ask, or see information like this. And the thing is, there's best practices out there. You have peers out there that are doing things that are really, really helping them manage their facilities like never before. And I like to think that you folks going through this presentation and through this course will be that way. That you will have different ways of measuring intentionally excuse me, your operations and your performance that will help your peers. Again, I'm an advocate of cooperation, competing to cooperate, making others better. And so, when it comes to your peers, you could even do presentations at your local chapter meetings, on reporting or benchmarking or dashboards. Would be a great. I would love to sit through one of those from my peers, and be able to advance our profession. So, communicating to your professional peers, advancing your organizations, doing seminars at the at ASHI annual conferences or regional conferences would be a great opportunity. Communicate to the accreditation organization. This was one of my favorite things to do. When I had an accreditation organization come in, for me, doing the regular stuff, getting the PMs done, getting the repairs done, that was just, let's get it done. But let's improve processes, and let's use data and information to do it, and let's show that we did it. And when we did do it, let's show folks what we did do. And I love when the accreditation organization would come in and survey us, and you'd have the life safety officer, or back in the day the physician surveyor, and you sit there and say, hey, let me show you what I'm doing that's really exciting. Let me show you what we did this last 2 years or 3 years, or whatever it was, that's helping us improve what we do. And they would get just so excited with you. Very often they say, can I take that with me? I'd love to share that with others. So let them know. I think that when you're doing really, really well with the surveyor, when they close the book on all the standard information, and they say, I can see you're doing a great job here, and I really don't need to look any deeper into this. Tell me what you're doing. Tell me the extra stuff you're doing, because they just know it. And then you get to share with them this great information. It's like it is an amazing moment. And very often what they will do is they'll go to those closing meetings and they'll just brag on the excellent performance that they saw in your area of responsibility. And that's obviously it feels great. And but again, do that, use it. And of course, take all this information that you're summarizing week to week or month to month and use it for those annual summaries. What a great way to cap off this data than to take this information and put it into a report that you can give to your administration, or to whoever does your performance review, or maybe do a board level report for the hospital board and show them the good things that are happening. Because administrators and your administrative team love the board to see the great work that you're doing. Okay, well, this does conclude this session on reporting. And again, as I said in the beginning, I hope that that this session, along with the implementation session together, really does give you a very solid bookend, and also really does build the foundation for future innovations in the industry. I really look forward to you all getting back to me with benchmarks and dashboards and different things that you do that in the future that are going to move our profession forward. And I just hopefully this is definitely hopefully a part of that future. Thank you for listening to the presentation, and again, please make sure, hope you took some good notes for the upcoming quiz and assignments.